come on. That doesn't line up.
Whoa!
So, I bought a lathe for the sole purpose of teaching myself how to turn with carbide turning tools and help out a wonderful charity at the same time. Now, I was invited on Instagram to collaborate to make some chisel handles. Myself and a handful of super talented makers and woodworkers were each asked to make 2 handles in their own style that would be added to 2 complete full sets of 2 cherries chisels. Wow, that's a lot of 2s. Wow, that's a lot of 2s. And then each set will be raffled off with all proceeds donated to colorofchange.org, a nonprofit social advocacy organization. Now, if you're seeing this video roughly around when it's released, the raffle is still going on. The deadline is July 23rd to buy your tickets. All the details are in the description below on where to buy tickets, how much they cost, what you'll win. They'll show pictures of all the finished sets. And here's a sneak preview of what it looks like. Also, big thanks to Woodpecker Tools for helping me out and sending me their ultra shear carbide turning tools to help with this project. Now, I have several different tools to work with here. This is a square tool.
A round tool.
A detail tool. A parting tool. And then I had some calipers that I can use to check the diameter for where the ferrule goes and other parts of the handle. So, I have a $200 Harbor Freight lathe, about 60 or 70 bucks for a live center for the tailstock and a live center for the headstock, a face shield to protect this, and the hope that I can make something really cool and not die. Here we go.
All right, so I tried to get a little fancy on the first one right out of the gate. I figured gluing some strips up and then creating maybe a little pattern in it might offer some visual appeal that would be pretty unique. So I kind of made some strips, cut an X, glued 2 more pieces in, and then decided to inlay some brass pins on all sides. Thought that might look pretty cool. And I just used some 5-minute epoxy to secure the pins. So if you've never turned with carbide tools either, the big thing is you want that tool to lie right on the center line of your workpiece. And also I realized that my tool rest, you can hear that, had a little nick in it. So I used a mill file just to make sure everything was nice and smooth, so when I'm running my tools back and forth, there's no hiccups, no speed bumps, no potholes. Now, to be honest, I really had no idea if these carbide tools were going to actually be able to cut this brass without a problem. And to my surprise, there was no problem. Yet. Using a pencil, I started to just lay out like where the ferrule goes and kind of where I wanted to start shaping this thing. I really had no idea, and I'm not a very creative person. Oh, there was the problem. I guess that epoxy wasn't quite dry. But that's okay. Quick repair. We're back in the game. As you can see, this thing's taking a weird shape. And time to move on to experiment number 2. Now at this point, you might be asking yourself, why didn't he drill all the way through and run the pins full length? Well, my drill press table was off just enough where if I did that, it came through off-center on the other side. Oh, zing. And as you can see, these carbide tools make quick work of roughing these blanks down. There's really not much technique to it at all. Just go in straight at your workpiece and move side to side. This is actually my favorite tool, the round tools. I seem to have much more control with this one and could shape the piece a little bit better than the square tool. You may also notice I have a lot of material out on the end there where the ferrule goes, which is completely unnecessary and gives this thing less support when you turn it. All right, I guess it's experiment number 3 time. So this one I try to get a little crazy. As you can see, I'm putting pins all the way around on this that I made into an octagon. Thought maybe I could create some kind of a necklace around this thing. I don't really know what I was thinking, but what I did learn, as you can see here, is to rough down all that brass flat with the surface of the wood so that it doesn't catch on the cutting tool when you're turning it. So again, this one went pretty smooth, no issues. So I'm using the last one I turned there as kind of a template to kind of mark out the shape of how I wanted this one to look. And as you can see, I did not learn my lesson about keeping too much material out on the end there. Eventually I will. Use a little sandpaper here, just kind of smooth down the edges, and then a little mineral spirits to see how this thing will look with finish. I mean, it looks kind of cool. I wasn't over the moon for it, but I thought it looked all right. So since I thought it might be a keeper, I decided to drill out the hole for the tang of the chisel itself. You can see it chewing through the brass there. Ooh, struggling a little bit. And I decided to test fit the ferrule on this one just to see how it looks. It's a little tight, but look at that custom engraved ferrule by Jennifer Bauer. Wow. Jeez, that music gets me every time. All right, so we are stepping way out of the box here on this one. My idea was to use some thin brass bar stock and glue everything in kind of an abstract intersecting pattern in hopes that once it's turned down into a cylinder, it looks really cool and funky. So in order to do this, it required 3 separate glue ups. The first one here. Now I'm using West Systems Marine Epoxy. Now there's a lot of things I learned on this that I should have done. Number 1 was to rough up the surface of that brass to give that epoxy something to grab onto. It also doesn't create a very strong mechanical bond with that angled end grain that is produced. So after the first glue up was dry, I made a couple more cuts and it was another glue up. You can see that kind of abstract X pattern going on there. All right, I guess it's on to experiment number 5 in the meantime. So what I learned after turning some of these down with the pins in is it works better to turn it down to almost final size and see where the pins look best and how they orient with the grain. So that's how I did this one. Because if you drill holes and glue in the brass pins when it's still square, you have no idea where it's going to lie on that grain once you finally turn it down. It could be off-center, it could just look weird, and you could be thinking to yourself, man, I wish those pins were right here. So that's a better way to do it. So once I had it turned down to shape, I kind of got the end profiled the way I wanted to and sanded it down. And then after some mineral spirits, you can see that cathedral grain showing through, and that's what I wanted. I wanted a pin right in kind of the apex of each of them. Now I put 2 pins up near the collar, if that's what you want to call it, for 2 reasons. Since 2 Cherries Tools donated the sets of chisels, it was a nod to them, as well as this was going on a 20mm chisel, so I thought the 2 pins for 220, 20. It's not that big of a stretch. I mean, a comparison or an argument can be made for it.
Well, moment of truth. To see if the brass and walnut abstract creation works. Not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous here. This could very well explode. Proper safety gear. Apron on.
As I started to turn and I made it into that brass area, my confidence was high.
Whoa!
And then that happened.
Whoa! Well, that didn't take long. Dang.
Mark my words, friends, this idea is not dead, and you will see it again in the future. So on this one, I decided to take a different approach to the shape. And, I mean, I don't even know what, it's conical, sort of, at the top, and then tapers down on the back as well. And as I mentioned before, I kind of got it turned down to where I liked it, and then found the exact location of where I wanted those brass pins to go. And I just clamped my jigsaw upside down in my vise, and then used a metal wood blade to cut these brass pins. And I don't think I mentioned this before, but the 3 sizes of brass rod that I'm using are 1/4, 3/16, and 1/8. Now, one problem with using wood that moves and something like brass that does not is the two materials don't exactly work in harmony. As the wood shrinks and expands, the brass pins stay where they are, so at some point they may be proud of the surface, and another time they may be just beneath the surface. The way to avoid this would be to take that wood and dip it in a pressure pot with epoxy resin and stabilize it so it will basically never move. My problem with that is it basically just then becomes a piece of plastic, which I'm much more comfortable with that wood expanding, contracting, and it still having that natural feel. However, with that experiment with the brass bar stock, I am going to stabilize that one just to make sure everything stays cohesive in a nice chunk of petrified resin. Yeah, I only needed to make 2 handles, but I went a little overboard. Sometimes I do that. Moment of truth, folks. First handle going on. Little epoxy there just to keep it in place. Oh, it's a friction fit.
Oh, come on. That doesn't line up.
And you might be asking, why couldn't you just turn the handle a little bit to get it to line up? Well, I didn't show you the other side. The pins on the other side that I had were way off center. I don't know what the heck happened. So this was my favorite handle, and then I needed to delicately destroy it to make sure I didn't damage that ferrule. And then I chose another. Let's hope I don't destroy this one. Nice little custom leather collar by Alex over at Upcycled Skate Art, who was the maestro behind this whole project. All right. This one came out nice. No hiccups. Honestly, okay. So all in all, I spent about 6 or 7 days teaching myself how to turn and making 18 plus handles along the way, and settled on these 2, which I'm pretty happy with. Turning with Carbide tools was a lot easier than I thought, and I encourage anyone who's interested in turning to try out the Carbide first and see if it's something you do like before maybe converting over to traditional steel tools.